Hi, everybody. I'm Jerry McHugh Jr., owner-president of San Juan Resources. We're an independent exploration production company, and today we are privileged to host Dr. Roger Pielke Jr., tenured professor at the University of Colorado. If you're wondering about climate alarmism, what is really going on, then this discussion is for you. On his Substack, The Honest Broker, Roger describes himself as and says, "I'm an undisciplined academic. I study and write about the messy, complicated places where science meets politics." Roger is a leading expert on extreme weather phenomena. His congressional testimony in 2013 lifted the veil on politicized, alarmist claims about extreme weather. His honest testimony led to a multi-year campaign to discredit him and to remove him from his position at CU Boulder. He is always willing to highlight data, analyses, and commentary missing from public discussions. He embodies our principle of just be honest. And his Substack, The Honest Broker, boasts subscribers in all 50 states and over 130 countries. So with that, welcome. What an honor it is to have you meet with us today.
Jerry, thanks for that very gracious and kind introduction. I think there's only one way to go from here, which is
Yeah, well, as an independent oil and gas producer, we've been gravely affected by the skewed narratives from climate alarmists. And as producers, we want the lowest emissions possible. So technology advancements in production are key. Plus, we operate out of the San Juan Basin, second largest gas field in North America. So natural gas is a very low emitter and has been touted as an incredible rich fuel, which many across the world are embracing. So I understand the Earth is warming. Getting our planet under control is a monumental task. Somehow people think there's a magic formula for a climate fix. I'm skeptical, but this is where I started following you. And I've been impressed with your courage, fortitude, and honesty in getting out your scientific research story on climate catastrophes and trends over thousands and thousands of years. That's why I'm so grateful you've been willing to come on. So anything you'd like to start out with on where we're going here?
Yeah, I'm happy to follow your lead, but I will say in my experience, working on this issue now for 30 years, it's pretty clear to me that a lot of the advocates who are demanding, just stop oil, we're going to get off fossil fuels by 2030, and things that are, deeply unrealistic, don't really have an appreciation for the scale of the energy economy, the energy system that powers our world. And if you think it's easy, I'm just going to unplug fossil fuels and plug in my alternatives, I can understand why people might get frustrated or think that it's, there's some obstruction going on. And so in a lot of the talks I give in my classes, one of the most important things I start with is scale, and how big the energy system is. And it is important, as you say, to decarbonize our economy. Getting to net zero is an aspiration. It's not a target. I don't think 2050 is possible, but I certainly think by the end of the century, if we put our mind to it, it's possible. So sorting through what science says, what's feasible, what's plausible, what's realistic in this hyper politicized debate is really, really difficult. And the last thing I'll say as introduction, we always have to remember there's 4 or 5 billion people around the world who don't enjoy the access to energy services that you and I and probably all the listeners enjoy. And so this is a monumental challenge of delivering more energy and energy services to people around the world, while at the same time trying to reduce emissions down to zero. And it's a challenge of a century. It's not a month to month, year to year, even a decadal challenge. It's a long-term slog.
Well, yeah, and so many of those folks don't have energy or use very, very little. Yet they comprise a huge population of the world which wants to grow and to better their own lives too, primarily, which is very important. So, let's backtrack to when you went to your congressional testimony in 2013. What did you think was going to be the reaction from the climatism folks when you went into that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been fortunate over my career to testify many times before Congress. I've been invited by Democrats, been invited by Republicans at various points in my career. I usually say the same things. It's just the context changes. In 2013, I was invited to the Senate, and I gave testimony. And it's one of those moments you never really expect or prepare for. But my 5-minute opening statement was posted on YouTube, and it went viral. It got like 400,000 hits, which is a lot for a professor. I was invited back to the House later that year to give the same testimony, and basically what I did in that testimony was summarize what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) said about extreme events. And because the issue is so politicized, people get their information from headlines, from their favorite advocacy groups. And I did not expect that summarizing the IPCC, which is pretty dry and boring stuff, would go viral like that. And for me, it was an eye-opening moment that, hey, the public discourse has departed in large degree from what the scientific community, writ large, believes about trends and extreme events. And as you say, that was kind of the start of a long series of events.
Mm-hmm. And so what happened next was the big campaign to discredit what you were saying by these NGOs and by these alarmist groups.
Yeah, I mean, so soon after I testified, I think it was a couple months, President Obama's science advisor, John Holdren, testified before the same committee. And he said a few things that were, obviously out of step with the IPCC, very, very aggressive statements about changing extreme events. And as I do, I'm very public about it. I wrote a blog post, noting John Holdren was I think forward on his skis. And he went back to the White House, and 5 days later, wrote a 6-page screed about me, posted it on the White House server. I think I'm the only academic or scientist in the history of the U.S. Presidential Science Advisor, which goes back to the 1950s, who's been singled out by the White House and attacked like that. And one thing I learned there was that the White House is a bully pulpit, and it can be used to bully as well as other things. And the Center for American Progress, a very liberal group in Washington, decided to put me in its targets, wrote more articles about me at that time than it did about Republican presidential candidates and senators. So there was an ongoing effort to discredit me, and I'm fine with the back and forth on facts, data, policy argument. This was something else altogether. Then the next year, 2015, a member of the House, Representative Raul Grijalva from Arizona, decided to open an investigation of me, and said that because of the criticisms that were made against me by President Obama's science advisor, John Holdren, he suspected I was taking money under the table from Exxon.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, nothing like, being associated with ExxonMobil to get people all excited. It was in the New York Times, it was in the local Boulder paper.
Oh, goodness.
My wife heard about it at work. My kids heard about it at school. And, fortunately, there were some people in the scientific community who stood up, and I was one of 7 researchers that were targeted by Grijalva. But the university went ahead and investigated me, and I don't take any money from Exxon or any other energy company, so it wasn't. I wasn't worried about the outcome, but none of this is about reality. It's a lot of it's about perception and discrediting people and doing anything possible to avoid talking about science and data. So it's from 2014 through about 2019, it was a pretty rough ride.
Oh, goodness.
But I got academic tenure, and I guess I'm stubborn or dumb, or some combination of the two. But I feel really good that I'm out on the other side of all that at this point in my career.
Well, and you'd written about how the tenure system was a good thing, because allowed for academic freedom and professors and those that had tenure to have that freedom to do what's right and call it how they see it, and not have their arm twisted or something.
Yeah, I mean, tenure doesn't prevent the political and social pressures that everybody feels for, when you engage in controversial topics. And not many professors actually take advantage of tenure in that way. And I get it; it can be very uncomfortable. But for me, it was a good lesson that I had at least career security. Even if things were difficult at times on campus, I directed a very successful and prominent center, and I lost that directorship in the process. But for me, the ability to participate in policy debates and call things like I see them is, for me, it's a privilege, and I'm kind of used to it now. And it's been a school of hard knocks, but
it's battle tested, I guess.
Right? Yeah, knowing what I know now, I would have, and knowing where I am today, I would go through it all again. Knowing how things look on the other side.
Right. So you got through it. Were there people who you'd relied on for support and verification of your work, and any surprises of who supported you, who did not?
Yeah, there's well, the first thing, I got a real strong family life, which it's always good to detach from the policy and political debates and online. So that was always the rock solid foundation. But it is interesting finding out who your friends are, who supports open inquiry, who succumbs to the social and political pressures. And yeah, there were some surprises. I am fortunate that I've been doing this long enough, as I have a network of people around the world who have been incredibly supportive. Not many are out in the open like me. Some are quite well known in academia. One person in particular, he's passed away a few years ago. His name's Steve Rayner. He was a professor at Oxford, and he was kind of a career mentor from the 1990s for me, and always had my back. Another one's a guy named Dan Sarowitz, who I met when I worked on the Hill. Great guy. They're two of the giants in my academic field. And then, it's interesting on campus to see, what administrators support you and the many actually that don't.
Right.
You think that universities are places where, a lot of attention or, being in the papers would be viewed as a good thing, but universities often are very conservative, small c conservative places. They don't want to rock the boat. And
right.
And so, going through the process, I did learn a lot about myself and a lot of people. And I'm glad to have that knowledge. I'm glad to know who the people I can trust are.
Real test of who you can rely on and who not to.
Yeah.
So you had a reception at the U.S. Senate a couple months ago too. You testified.
I testified before the Senate Banking Committee in June 2023, and that was very rewarding because I was invited by Republicans to testify. So late in the last couple of years, I've been invited by Republicans, and everybody gets invited by one side or the other. So and my policy always is, if I get asked to testify before a legislature, whether it's Colorado, United States, Italy, Norway, Australia, where I've had opportunities, I'm going to go regardless of who invites me, because my salary is paid by the public. And so I testified about scientific integrity and the importance of supporting organizations like the IPCC and the U.S. National Climate Assessment, both of which have intense pressures to be politicized. And at the end of the hearing, I had 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats come up to me and thank me for my testimony. And I think they were very sincere. And the chair of the committee, Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, who is a climate firebrand, he quoted from my Substack in his closing remarks. So, for me, I figure if my testimony was heard by people on both sides of the aisle, then, I did my job that day.
Sure.
And, it's for participating in the process. There's a lot of people who testify who are just warriors for Democrats, warriors for Republicans. And then it's more theater. So I relish the chance to try to build bridges and find that ground where there might be some overlap, and it's really hard to do. But I think on that day, I had a good day.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned earlier back at the university teaching a couple classes each semester, and
yeah, that's enormously rewarding. I've been around long enough teaching. I joined the faculty at Colorado in 2001. Some of my first students are now, middle-aged people like me. And, I have students who work in the Senate and OMB, in the White House, National Security Council, who started businesses, are very successful, who work for nonprofits in the environmental space and nuclear. And so for me, teaching is always what kind of keeps me grounded to, the sensibilities of the next generation, students who are coming up who really want to do good in the world, but aren't exactly sure how.
So before CU, did they recruit you to come there from some other place, or I guess?
Yeah, so when I look back, it all looks kind of logical, but when you're going forward through life, I think everybody knows this, it's a lot of uncertainty. But I graduated with a PhD from University of Colorado, and I was recruited to come to National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, and
Okay.
I joined that organization as a staff scientist, and that's when I started working on extreme weather. I was put on a project looking at Hurricane Andrew and the Midwest floods of 1993. And so I started really studying extreme weather events before they were all caught up in the climate mania, which I think probably served me well in the end. And I came to the energy policy stuff later. And I was at NCAR for 8 years. And I'd been doing some teaching on the side for Colorado. And a guy named Jim White and an administrator named Susan Avery recruited me to come start a science policy center at Colorado. So,
Oh, wow.
So for me, it was a great move. NCAR is a great place. It's you can get so much done. But it's a quiet place. There's no students running around. So, early in my career, I really enjoyed the opportunity just to buckle down and, do a lot of good research. But then at some point I was thinking, yeah, I'd like to see students every day or every couple of days and, liven things up.
Be humbled and real life kind of world there too. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Right size. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Good. Well, your Substack called The Honest Broker is quite a thing, and I'd encourage the listeners to read it and to subscribe to it. One thing I thought you said in there about it is how writing is a passion of yours, and I would have to say the missives you put out every several days are quite well, obviously, well, I thought even before I read that you like to write, I said, "Man, this is really well written." And then it's succinct and it covers it, and it's just kind of plain. It's not too high, too low. It's just it's really nice. So you've had a lot of success on that.
Yeah, I've been blogging for almost 20 years, and it's a format that works well for me. When I started, it was a long time ago. It was probably 2005. We started a science policy blog, and this was in the early days of blogging at the University of Colorado. It was called Prometheus. And at some point, it became the third most accessed website at the university, like behind the math modules. And so I realized that this format where you have basically columns, even shorter, you present some data or some analysis, for me, went hand in glove with doing research. Because in academia, we do research, we write it up, we submit papers, we get some peer reviews, and that whole process can take like a year and a half. And you can share papers and get feedbacks from colleagues, but the instantaneous kind of community or external peer review of your work in real time, it's tough. I mean, if you're a subscriber, you've seen my comments, and my commenters aren't shy about telling me if I get something wrong or they have a different opinion.
Right.
But it sharpens your thinking, your writing, and your ideas, so that when you do get to the point of writing a peer-reviewed scientific article, you feel pretty good that the ideas have been, tested in a way that they generally aren't just in a pure academic setting. So the other thing I found out, and Substack is great with this, is the reach. And I don't know if it's something to do with today's media environment or people's hunger for information, but the reach is incredible. As you said in the introduction, I have subscribers in every US state and in 130 countries around the world. And if you would have told me that, I can publish a peer-reviewed paper in Nature or Science, the top journal, and I'll be lucky to get a few thousand people to read it. So it is a kind of a new era, I think, for being out in public and sharing research. And for me, it's been a enormously rewarding.
Well, and Substack has gained in popularity just with the all the the shutdowns of certain opinions or certain viewpoints, or even honest viewpoints like yours from other social media or other platforms. So that's been a real blessing to the world.
Yeah, I had an experience that really shaped my thinking on this. In 2014, Nate Silver of 538 contacted me and asked me to join his organization when they were moving from New York Times to ABC. And at that time, this was right when the John Holdren stuff was starting, and I was like, well, this climate stuff is a little bit hot. Can I also write about sports governance issue, which was another passion of mine? He said, sure. But he said, but the first piece we want you to do is on disasters and climate change. And in that first column, I basically summarized my testimony that had gone viral the year before. It was straight out of the IPCC, but there was an enormous campaign by leading journalists, Paul Krugman at the New York Times, to have me fired from that position. And so I lost my job at 538, which was a great forum. And so for me, Substack offers the opportunity where I can't be canceled. People can yell at me all they want, but I can get my stuff out there, and I don't have to go through gatekeepers. And if people realize, he doesn't have a boss, he's writing for himself. There's nobody to go to complain. Mm-hmm. So Substack is a really interesting model, and I read a lot of Substacks. There's a lot of great writers out there. And the main problem is the volume. There's just so much good stuff.
Yeah, there really is. Is. I have a hard time sorting that stuff out myself with my normal job, which is finding and developing oil and gas. So,
right. Right.
So one of my favorite posts was the review did for Dr. Holmes' book, Climate Changes and Everything, and some real good points out of there. That was one of your Substack posts about 2.5-3 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah, that was a guest post, one of my first commissioned guest posts by Volker Hahn from Leipzig, Germany.
Yeah.
And I've known Mike Hume for decades, and he's an interesting climate scientist. He's one of the original IPCC scientists from the 1990s, was central in a lot of climate modeling. And he has this new book out, and it's actually on my syllabus in my energy policy class this fall. And it's about reining in what he calls climate alarmism. And the title of the book is Climate Change is Not Everything. Right. And which seems like a common sense sort of thing to say, but in these times, he gets castigated as a skeptic or a denier. But he has all the street cred in the world you would want in the scientific community. So it's, his views are well worth listening to.
Okay. How does that go over, by the way, at the University of Colorado for a course like that? I mean, my goodness gracious.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of discussion about, professors getting canceled on campus or criticized, or and the last time I had any criticism on campus of anything that was on a syllabus or anything I was teaching, literally it was like 2002. Okay. I'd assigned Bjorn Lomborg's book, the skeptical environmentalists, I had a graduate seminar go in, and we took it chapter by chapter and critiqued it and found out what was strong, what was weak. But I had some faculty and some students who protested that. Lomborg was a very polarizing figure back then. There's a program at the University of Colorado Boulder where they bring in a conservative scholar. And I won't name any names, but about 5 or 6 years ago, we had a conservative scholar sit in our program. And when he left, he said, I thought it was going to be all about politics and green ideology. And, he said it was just boring stuff about who teaches what class. And so there's a lot of respect at the University of Colorado for what people research, what people teach. I haven't felt any pressure. Students appreciate my classes, and I appreciate that they're open-minded and come in. And so I think the concerns about academic freedom in universities, they are real, but to some degree, people think that they're, a much broader issue than they actually are in the practice of what you do. So for the last 4 years, I sat in an environmental studies program and taught my energy policy classes. At the same time, I'm, very prominent publicly. So, and I no pushback or concerns whatsoever.
Okay. Well, that's sounds like a great campus to be at. And
yeah, I think it is. There's more diversity on campus than people would think. I mean, it is Boulder, and Boulder, both the community and the university, is not a particularly diverse place economically, socially, demographically. But there's more political diversity on campus than I think people
right
would appreciate.
Well, another one of your Substacks I thought was interesting was the White House talking about RCP 8.5, and explain to me a little bit about that in the list.
Yeah,
that was
there's a fascinating,
pretty key.
Yeah, a fascinating series of developments in climate research, and there's a really long story, and I've talked about it on a number of podcasts for an hour and a half. But in a nutshell, about 20 years ago, getting on to be 20 years ago, the climate community settled on some scenarios to use to look at climate futures. And scenarios are used because we can't just pick, and you can't predict the future with accuracy like we can, tomorrow's weather. So they use scenarios that depend on things like, well, how many people are going to be on the planet? What's our economy going to look like? What are our energy sources going to be? How are we going to consume that energy? And we come up with a range of scenarios. And they boiled down something like 1,200 scenarios to 4. And the key input for climate projections is carbon dioxide emissions, and specifically carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. And they said, all right, we're going to have a high scenario, a low scenario, and then 2 in the middle. It wasn't much more complicated than that. And at the time, they said, well, we're going to assume that the high scenario is where we're headed. And they called it variously, a reference scenario or business as usual. Flash forward, 15 years or so, and it turns out we're not on that high scenario. Emissions aren't going up, up, and up. In fact, the current projections are that worst case, we're on a long plateau of emissions. Partly because of the rise of natural gas, partly because of low carbon or carbon-free technologies that are being deployed. And also the fact that coal isn't expanding as rapidly as it was once believed it would in the 1990s. So that's good news. We're not on the worst case scenario path. And the climate community has known this for a while. One of my colleagues, a guy named Justin Ritchie, deserves all the credit in the world. He wrote a PhD on this, almost 10 years ago. And it's a sticky situation for the climate research community because a lot of research is based on and predicated on this very extreme scenario, as you said, RCP 8.5, that projects, kind of an apocalyptic future. So it's really good for publishing high impact papers, for university press releases, for media stories on, the coming Armageddon. But reality is not as dire as it would be suggested. So recently, the Biden administration came out with its latest estimates for what's called the social cost of carbon, which is a regulatory estimate of how much it costs society for each ton of emitted carbon dioxide. And deep in the weeds, if you go into the report and then the appendix and the appendix to the appendix, you'll find that these extreme scenarios don't exist anymore. In parallel, the climate research community is now thinking about the next generation of scenarios that will inform, the next decade of climate research. And they too are talking about abandoning this extreme scenario. All that's good news, but the frustrating thing is a lot of our discussions, a lot of our policy debates are based on this outdated science, this old scenario. And the analogy I use is like we're driving forward, with policy, looking in the rearview mirror. Never a good idea. So how do we get the latest, best science in front of decision makers, published in journals, get the media to appreciate it? And I'm not going to mince words about this. Very extreme scenarios have political cachet in the climate movement.
Well, they
like them. So if you come up with a much more plausible scenario, but isn't as extreme, you'll get accused of quote unquote minimizing climate change. So we're in a situation where being accurate is perceived to be politically uncomfortable or unfavorable, which is never a good place for science to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a good nutshell wrap up of that. And the Biden administration is tampering down those extreme scenarios, RCP 8.5 down to 6 or 4 or something. I think that's what
the worst case consistent with what's called current policies these days is an RCP 4.5. It's like a plateau, 2019 emissions as far as the eye can see. But the Biden administration, they're saying two things at once. So there is a program called the National Climate Assessment. It was put in law in 1991. It's supposed to be delivered every 4 years to provide guidance for policymakers on what climate science most recently says. It's located in the White House, in the executive office of the president, which is a problem because Republicans steer it towards their political ends and Democrats steer it toward their ends. But the draft has been published for comment, and this one relies on RCP 8.5 as business as usual, and RCP 4.5, this lower scenario, as policy success. Neither one of those is accurate. And I understand the political difficulties. Can you imagine if the Biden administration says, hey, that scenario we've been calling policy success? Well, it's actually a worst case scenario now. So they've kind of painted themselves into a bit of a corner. And, the simple thing would be just to declare success, thanks to policy initiatives and technology and fracking and wind and solar, we're no longer on this worst case scenario, and we're going to adjust our assessments accordingly and declare success and move on. And I think the longer that policymakers and advocates hold on to this outdated scenario, the more difficult the transition will be to more realistic science.
Okay, so you're still, nothing's really changed, although the base thoughts have changed. Still, the worst case scenario is being played out in the White House Climate Office.
Yeah, I think the prevalence of the RCP 8.5 is pretty endemic at this point. What has changed is that I think that the scientific community who are specialists in this area now almost completely agree that this extreme scenario is no longer plausible. So there's starting to be papers published where people will actually say that. But it's one thing to go from, a general understanding in the, rank and file of the scientific community to regulatory policy, to international policy discussions, much less the media and public understandings. That's still, there's a lot of work to be done there.
Well, the rhetoric is that it's the worst climate ever and it's killing people daily. The heat is, and all this other stuff. So
yeah, and this is the frustration because climate change is real. It does have effects. The IPCC says, they detected and attributed changes in heat waves, in particular, and extreme precipitation. But if we're going to rely on the IPCC, we got to take the whole thing, because they also say they have not detected and attributed trends in hurricanes, floods, meteorological or hydrological drought, tornadoes, hail. And so there's an enormous range of extreme events that every day get pinned on climate change. And they have consequences. I mean, hurricanes kill people, they cause damage. But we have to, I just saw it in The Guardian this week. There was a comment that said, if we change energy policy, we can change the weather. And it doesn't work like that. And it should be fairly obvious to people why it doesn't work like that. But there is this sense that if we pass a bill mandating solar and wind, then tomorrow we're not going to have any hurricanes. And that's just kind of a cartoonish caricature of what science actually says.
Wishful thinking and magical thinking too.
Yeah. Well, we should all be fortunate that the climate isn't instantaneously sensitive to our energy policy decisions. Yeah. We'd be in a lot worse situation if it was.
I remember the commercial when I was a kid. If you do too, it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature.
Yeah. But, which is a good adage. It makes sense. The case for decarbonizing our economy, whether through efficiency or through cleaner burning fuels, is a very strong case without having to abuse science. And so for me, that's one of the frustrations, because the challenge of decarbonization is a century-long challenge. And so we need a broad coalition of people in the fossil fuel industry, in alternative energy technologies, in technologies of energy consumption, to work together, and they need a broad base of political support. So my enduring frustration with this issue is that both the left and the right sees political advantage in politicizing it.
Right.
Which is about the worst thing you can do for sustaining policy over the long term.
Right. Well, it's better to have critical thinkers, people talking back and forth, people working together. That's why I do this podcast and let people know that there are efforts going on out there to try to bridge the gap of misinformation and just one-sidedness too, because I can be as one-sided as anybody,
I mean, I know a lot of people all around the world who are working on this topic. There's a lot of smart, level-headed, non-politicized people working on this issue. It's just that there's a very powerful overlay of politicization on things. And people are frightened for their careers, they're frightened for their social standing. And it's just a very difficult community in which to operate. It's not unique. I've spent some time working on issues of COVID origins, and whether you think it's a lab leak or natural origin, there are the same sort of pressures for people to fall in line on that issue. And so I think this is a kind of a symptom of our times, and climate change is an extreme example, but it's not the only one.
We've got just a little bit more time. Is there any other thing you'd like to talk about with what you've been working on, or where you see the Honest Broker going these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. The Honest Broker has succeeded beyond my wildest expectations, and my thinking going forward is, can I use it as a platform to bring particularly younger researchers, bring their voices out into the public sphere, and in the process provide them with some training in how you do that in a way that you protect yourself, but you also get ideas into the mix. One of the big issues that's risen in my field over the last, let's say, 15 or 20 years is this idea of science communication. It's actually now a field. And the idea is, we recommend to young scholars to go out, communicate your science, go on Twitter or whatever it's called now, get a Substack, testify before Congress, write op-eds. We don't train these young folks particularly well to do that. But the worst thing we do is we don't tell them what happens when you succeed. So success is, hey, a policymaker is citing my op-ed on the floor of Congress. Well, guess what? Everybody associated with the other side is going to come after you. And so how to jump into the deep end of the pool is not easy if you don't know how to swim. So I would like to use the Honest Broker to try to provide younger scholars, and I have some lined up, but an opportunity to, explore and see, is this for you in a way that's a little bit safer than just jumping out on
Right,
their own.
right, yeah.
So for me, I'm not sure where it's going to go, but if it continues to grow an audience, and I do have some resources to reinvest into the community, that for me, that would be fantastic. And so it's great to have PhD students who work on projects for 4 or 5 years, but being able to take early career folks, whether they're in government labs or academia, and give them a forum where I can say, your voice will be heard. And I have members of parliaments in many countries that subscribe to the Honest Broker, and for me, just knowing that your voice is going to be in those settings, to me, it ups my game. So, and it will for them too.
So you can point that to the young scholars coming up and say, here's an example of how it's a good place to work, and you're not gonna, whatever you discover is gonna be read and not tortured, not thrown out.
The other thing is, I don't know, I write a couple hundred posts, maybe more a year, and I don't get everything right, and some of them are, they don't land right, and people tell you, and how to incorporate feedback, even critical feedback, to make what you do that much better. I think, for me, it was a skill developed through this. Wasn't taught it, and I didn't learn it probably early enough, but it's something that anyone who wants to be in the public space should take advantage of that public space to learn, to be sharper, to get better, to make their analyses more robust. And if you want to figure out what hits with a bipartisan audience, put a policy proposal out there, and you'll hear what works, what doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And the other advantage of like a Substack is it's not a one-time thing, because if you're writing continuously, arguments evolves, ideas evolve, you get more data, and hopefully there's some convergence among a broader community on policy ideas or evidence. And so the journey is just as important as any.
Okay. That's interesting. So also enjoyed your blog about the CU football program. Just change gears here, and your 4 scenarios of what could happen this next couple of years with Coach Prime and all that, just to change gears and try to end up in a pretty good note here. So
I worked in the athletic department at Colorado for 4 years or so. I know the folks there real well. I know Rick George real well. The whole conference realignment saga, which we're still going through, I think it really has exposed that college football is a big time business. Players make a lot of money for universities, for coaches, and support other programs, and so Colorado is kind of a canary in the coal mine for this. I have no doubt. One of the things I'm most certain about, that college football players and other athletes are going to be either employees or compensated, like employees in the next coming years. And so we have this unique subset of there's like 3,600 colleges and universities in the U.S. About 100 of them have big time football programs. About 60 or 70 are in the Power 5, which is pretty soon going to be the Power 2. And so I think this is forcing a reckoning among our largest universities as to what are we here for? We teach students and we provide credentials and degrees, but we also give them a great experience. We do world-class research, and it turns out we have football programs. Right. So the Deion Sanders experiment at Colorado, it's, there's some unique aspects to Colorado. It's going to sink or swim. I don't think there's going to be much in the middle. But it's also a testament to that, the leadership of the University of Colorado, from the regents on down, see football as one of the core missions of CU Boulder.
Oh, yeah.
And so
kids like to go there because that's my little daughter went there because of big time sports.
I went to the Orange Bowl in 1990 when I was a senior. playing against Notre Dame. So it was an enormous part of my experience. So, this just means universities have to make decisions. Right now, CU Boulder transfers about $12 million of student tuition to support its athletics program.
Mhm.
Colorado State up in Fort Collins transfers about $28 million. And this is real money, and it comes from tuition that otherwise would go to, the educational side of the house. And for me, being more transparent about these sort of decisions, their implications, it's fine if they want to have big football programs, but let's be out in the open and let a broader set of stakeholders make decisions about priorities.
Right.
Because, West Virginia just cut a whole bunch of its academic programs. And they said, you can get your language instruction on Duolingo or online. So
Babble.
yeah. So universities can't do everything they want to do.
Yeah.
And so I think we're in a period where talking openly about priorities will be real important.
Almost like you need to have you take a part of the football team, just take it out of the university, and so they can concentrate on football. This is it's a spin-off. They spin off the football program. Now they can concentrate on academics.
Right. Yeah. And, there's, a number of people have made proposals, in addition to being compensated, give these athletes a lifetime scholarship. Right. Mm-hmm. You can come back at any time and earn your degree. And, I've taught many athletes in my classes, and it is a hard duty to expect, in all of these sports, these athletes to be world-class athletes, and then, take a full load of coursework. There's some nice work done by the NCAA and others, Pac-12, on how athletes in universities spend their time, and they don't have any time. They don't have, it's remarkable. They don't have time to sleep, much less do homework. So
right.
And now we're expecting, Stanford to fly to, Clemson or vice versa. And we're only in the middle of the shakeout, I think, right now. And
yeah. Well, it's what seems like what the public wants. They want their college football, and they want their allegiances with their either their alma mater, their favorite school, or wherever their state where they're located. So
yeah. Well, we're in an interesting period because universities have lost the support of a lot of Americans, more Republicans than Democrats, but also among Democrats. And it turns out that college football is one of the things that college attendees or not college attendees like about universities. So, there is a very important, cultural element to football in this country, and it goes beyond just people with bachelor's degrees.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah.
Universities, I think, have to see that as an asset, and as they think about how do we get broader public support for what universities do, football is a part of that equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you've got a lot of broad interests, and your The Honest Broker has dabbles of that, which are interesting to read. And any closing comments? I guess we're going to see you here in a couple of weeks at Liberty and Energy Breakfast here in Denver.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It's another privilege I have, is I get to get off campus and talk to people out in the real world. And they invite me to talk, and I'm a professor. I talk to anybody, but I often learn more than I give at these sort of events. So I'm looking forward to
we'll look forward to seeing you there. And again, thank you, Roger. Great to have you on our SJIQ podcast, and great to hear your story, and very, very, very amazing, and all that. So thanks for
thanks, Jerry, and thanks for letting me talk about some things that I don't always get asked about. I appreciate that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, in our industry, we'll just keep moving ahead and working on things to at least my task is get our applications approved so we can drill. And they're going through all sorts of climate change templates and initiatives we have to do. So I don't want to bore you with that, but that's just part of the job these days. So
I'd love to learn more about that at some future conversation. That's
okay, definitely.
Fast.
Well, again, thank you for your time. Awesome. And thank you everyone for joining me and Roger on the SJIQ. Again, thank you very much. For over 50 years, Process Equipment and Service Company, or PESCO, has been proudly designing, building, and maintaining production equipment for its customers. Located in Farmington, New Mexico, PESCO sells and services units from across the western United States, from large majors to small independents like Sanwan Resources. PESCO is proud to sponsor the SJIQ, and they look forward to working with you, supporting the San Juan Basin community in any way they can. Whiptail Midstream operates crude oil, natural gas, and water gathering systems in the San Juan Basin to handle growing production from the Manca Shale. With more than 500 miles of well-positioned infrastructure, Whiptail is capable of delivering 38,000 barrels of oil per day, 100 million cubic feet of natural gas per day, while gathering and safely disposing of 8,000 barrels per day of produced water. Whiptail is an energetic and innovative company, is happy to support improving our SJIQ.